Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, May 29th, 2026. I'm John Butthortz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
So ceasefires are an interesting pause in action. And while they supposedly mean that there should be no kinetic action exchanged between the parties at ceasefire, that doesn't mean that other things can't be happening while the ceasefire is going on. We can position new forces, move our forces around, and so on. And it appears that the Iranians have been busy little beavers because, according to CNN, Iran used bulldozers and evacuation trucks to reopen at least 15 entrances to 18 underground missile sites during the ceasefire and returned missiles and launchers that U.S.-Israeli attacks closed inside mountain shelters. So this is yet another interesting indication that the ceasefire that we are still holding to and that the negotiating team, the U.S. negotiating team, seems to be intent on continuing, has been an unalloyed benefit for the Iranian regime with which we are at war. They have stabilized their control over the Straits of Hormuz. They have succeeded in making it appear as though the United States is paralyzed, and they are restoring some of the military capability that we had denied them and that we could have continued to deny them by continuing to hit these sites. So the ceasefire is, if you view Operation Epic Fury as the first battle of the war with Iran, the ceasefire might be considered the second battle in the war in Iran, and we won the first, and the Iranians are winning the second.
Can I make a very broad statement?
Please.
As silly as it sounds, ceasefires are bad. Like, the whole concept of a ceasefire in modern warfare is absurd. Ceasefires were not, they were not formal peace offerings. They were like a word. It was like a word used to describe a sort of mutually understood stoppage for a very defined short period of time for reasons that both sides liked, neither of which having to do with the war or the state of the war or negotiations itself. In other words, a ceasefire is not originally a bridge to negotiations. It's not a halfway house for peace. It's like, I don't know, let's not shoot each other on Palm Sunday or something sort of thing.
Well, Christmas, the famous Christmas ceasefire.
The Christmas Day, right. And that was, but that wasn't even planned, right? I mean, that was just sort of so ceasefires are not, we've turned them into this established thing, and they're always advantageous for the side that is losing at the moment of the ceasefire, right? I mean, that is, I think, undeniable, that if you pause a fight in the middle of a fight, the guy who needs the break more is the guy who benefits from the break. But the break always is one-sided. In the Middle East, Israel ceasefires, this is the first time that Israel has really punished ceasefire violations by Hezbollah, or by one of the fronts of its wars. But very often Israel shows tremendous restraint during ceasefires. And in fact, there was a Wall Street Journal article not too long ago. I wrote about it a bit, which talked about Israel's targeted assassination policy. They weren't carrying out targeted assassinations of Hamas leaders or people involved in October 7th, except on days when Hamas had already broken the ceasefire and they could plausibly argue that they were responding, and then they would push the button for the guy they've been tracking for 3 weeks. So restraint has been the West's move in ceasefires. It has never been the other side's move. Gaza, Hamas has never been restrained during a ceasefire. Hezbollah has stopped firing during some ceasefires, but Hezbollah has a permanent war footing. The ceasefires are not peace treaties, and Israel doesn't even have a peace treaty with the broader state of Lebanon. These are non-state actors. This is the way Iran is behaving too, just the way its proxies behave. And the whole idea is that if we need to push them into negotiations, then keep them in the corner. It's bizarre to me that we let people out of their corner in order to then negotiate, which puts us immediately on less advantageous footing. And I think the whole concept has just gotten blown out of, sort of out of control. It's like something you say because the oil markets are spooked, and that's not good enough to me.
Seth, I think that's a really terrific, refreshing point. It's true. The ceasefires have become like this sort of idealized, supposed step toward peace, which it never actually is. It's like what summitry has become. The people want to have summits for the sake of having summits, without there being a real partner for it, without there being anything agreed before, without even an understanding that there are two parties here to make a deal. And as you say, ceasefires are always advantageous to the side that's losing, which is why, for example, whenever Trump says we're very close to a ceasefire with Russia and Ukraine, depending on where the state of battle is at the time, one side is not eager to stop shooting because you're taking away their edge at the moment. And unlike them, we do it to ourselves.
Well, it is almost become a bureaucratic tool in these geopolitical situations. Although I was thinking at a more low culture state right now when a friend asked me, do you know what's going on with this whole Iran deal? And it did strike me that we are all like the briefcase girls on Deal or No Deal. And we're all just kind of holding our briefcases, and Iran is sort of saying, yeah, we'll do this. But then someone counteracts that within Iran saying, no, we're not negotiating that. We're doing this. And it's just started to become farcical in a way that is disturbing to me. But I'm glad you brought up Ukraine, Abe, because I wouldn't be surprised if there was suddenly Russian openness to some sort of ceasefire, because they just struck a NATO ally with one of their drones. So that's bad. And that's a conflict that we haven't spent much time discussing, but that is ongoing. And I hope that the Trump administration is using the ceasefire talk with Iran and in order to continue these negotiations, and that we'll hear sometime soon about where those stand. But the story about John, you're absolutely right to point out that this is advantageous to the Iranian regime, while they are probably getting help from allies and whatnot and rebuilding. And we're sitting here not even quite sure who we're negotiating with. Again, the lack of information coming out of the administration about where we are in the negotiations, the back and forth over the course of this week has been very frustrating as an American trying to figure out where we stand.
From what we can tell, there was this line being proffered, I don't know when it was, Monday, Tuesday, something like that a memorandum of understanding had been reached.
Right.
And it wasn't true. Whoever did it, Steve Witkoff, whatever, whoever briefed Barak Ravid at Axios or whoever, and then other people were briefing other people, said that these points had been agreed to. And it was not true, because the Iranians hadn't agreed to them and Trump hadn't agreed to them. Therefore, there appeared to be some form of external pressure being levied, I would say, on Trump to take a fait accompli, to be afraid to say no to the ceasefire deal because the public now knew about it. And after all, isn't that what the negotiators are supposed to be doing, is coming to a resolution? We got a second version of that on Tuesday or 2 days later. Trump hasn't responded. Just think about that for a minute. Trump says he wants a few more days to think about it or something like that. That's not a negotiation. He's basically saying no without saying no. And then we read the John Kerryization, about what I would call the John Kerryization of this negotiation, a very bizarre floated proposal that the United States will provide, along with allies, or there will be some kind of a $300 billion reconstruction fund created for Iran after the war. Now that is insane, and it really does, I am sorry, raise questions about the deep personal corruption of the people who are negotiating this deal, because what is a reconstruction effort? It is real estate. It is the reconstruction, rebuilding, reform of real estate. And who's going to get those contracts if that deal is ever made? Who is going to get the $300 billion? Trump's friends, people who are friendly to the administration, people who have been supportive of the administration, people who have real estate organizations that might want to participate in this, sort of like when we were talking about Gaza Lago, or whatever, Mara Gaza, right? Which was always fanciful. I think this is fanciful too. I mean, there is no way on earth that the Congress of the United States is going to authorize or appropriate $300 billion of American taxpayer money to reconstruct Iran, a country that we have basically deemed our enemy, unless there's regime change, unless we're talking about an entirely new country that we want to put on its feet. Even then, that money is not going to get appropriated. Why are they talking about it? What is going on?
It's like the Libya stuff. When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State and Libya was in the crosshairs during the Obama administration, the emails that had been unearthed by Hillary's bathroom server, whatever it was, had emails in which Sid Blumenthal was, writing to people in the administration about getting contracts in Libya. He was like, I've got these guys who will build mobile hospitals, field hospitals for after the war. They were already kind of staking in other words, the Secretary of State's own advisors were already kind of staking claim, dibs on what kind of contracts they and their friends were going to get in the rebuilding phase of the country we were supposedly at war with, or some form of war, because obviously what NATO did was decapitate the regime, so we can call it war. So this reminds me a lot of that, where people are sort of counting their chickens, and it's already, it's easy to lose sight of winning the war because they're talking about who gets to, what private contractors get to win the peace.
So there's a famous term, right? War profiteering. There was the Wade Commission during the Civil War. There was the Truman Commission during World War II, which made Harry Truman's reputation, led to him becoming vice president and then president, in which it was investigated who was getting government contracts to build up our forces to defeat the enemy, and whether or not they were absconding with the money or misspending it and all of that. Now here we're talking about post-war profiteering. Now, maybe that's always been the case. I mean, maybe the Marshall Plan was a form of post-war profiteering. I don't know. In fact, nobody really cares because the Marshall Plan was a uniquely historical achievement.
At least we all profited from the Marshall Plan.
Well,
exactly.
This is the point. Actually, that is an important point, because there's something unique about Trump's approach to some of this kind of profiteering that I think is worth noting, because there's a domestic political context here happening right now, which is what was one of the main reasons Trump won re-election. Getting the border under control. Right now, a $70 billion package is in a reconciliation bill to fund ICE, to fund Border Patrol, is being held up by senators, Republican senators, over a $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund. So that is, I think, a data point. He's got two priorities in conflict right now on his own side of the aisle, which is his need to kind of rewrite history, particularly regarding January 6th, but anyone he felt had was a victim of the weaponization of the Justice Department, including himself. But also the border, which is what voters want to see really, maintain that security and with the funding required. And the other data point there is that a bunch of federal judges have sent a letter to the federal judge who oversaw the original case with the IRS when Trump was a private citizen filing this case, and asked her to reopen and look at this because the settlement was not something she had oversight over. So there's a whole lot of pieces moving around with the anti-weaponization fund. And I think how the administration chooses to deal with that is going to be very interesting to watch, because even Republicans who have been generally loyal and voted for the things that the Trump administration has asked them to are really uncomfortable with this. And I think the American people will become increasingly uncomfortable with the idea of what this fund does. And I know there was a small scale version of this done under Obama with Native American farmers and stuff. And at the time, a lot of conservatives said this is a bad idea to have a fund of taxpayer dollars with no oversight from Congress, no oversight from the courts, that can just become a slush fund for whoever's in office. And I think that danger has now been we're going to have a similar set of questions with the way Trump is doing this. I'm, of course, looking further ahead and thinking, well, this would be great if I was a crazy left-leaning, say, AOC or someone like that who gets elected president. And I want slavery reparations. I want reparations for all the groups in society that I think got the shaft from history. This would be a way to do it. So it's the precedent here, and it's bad. And it doesn't matter if you think Trump was wrongly treated by some of our Justice Department and previous administrations. We've had that discussion. It's about, if we allow this sort of thing to continue, it's bad for the country long term.
I would make a theoretical small defense, not of the weaponization fund and not of this idea that it's specifically going to go to deal with excessive prosecutorial zeal after January 6th. But it is true that one of the great inequities in criminal law is that there is an imbalance between what the state can do and what a private citizen can do in confronting the state that charges him or her with a crime. The state prosecutor has no restraint in the form of limited money or limited resources. If their decision is made to prosecute, they can bring anybody in. They can force hundreds of hours of depositions. They can, make people fly over they can subpoena them at risk of going to jail. And those private citizens, unlike in a tort case where two people go to court and the person who may be making an unjust claim is restrained from doing that because of the possibility that they will actually have to pay the legal fees of the person that they sued. An unjust prosecution bankrupts the person who is being prosecuted, and they can never get that money back. So, and I mean, I can name 40 cases of people I know to whom this happened in unjust, I believe, special prosecutor cases and others in the 80s and 90s and even, later on. And so some manner of this question of whether or not, if you are pursued by the federal government in a political case, I don't know how you define that, and the government lets you be, you're still out $2 million in legal fees to defend yourself. And you are not allowed, about legal defense funds, right? So you are not actually allowed a lawyer is not allowed to provide, it's considered a gift if a lawyer does too much work for a private client. And therefore that is taxable to the person who gets the legal work. So this is a tiny defense of the theoretical justification for a weaponization fund.
And it's completely legitimate defense. And there would be nothing wrong with having that created with certain guardrails and oversight procedures in place for how those sorts of claims were determined. In this case, this fund would basically not have those. And that's one of the things that I think the Senate is saying, if you want this, to the president, saying, if you want this, then we need to come up with some sort of way of oversight so that this is not abused, so that someone who actually did commit a felony isn't then allowed to draw from the taxpayer's wallet money for their own benefit. And when you look at some of the people who have already spoken publicly who would like their hands on some of that money, these are people who are convicted felons. So those, whether or not, well, maybe they've been pardoned by the president, but the point is that that's not something the taxpayers should have to support. There should be some oversight. So I agree with you, John, and there have been a lot of politically motivated prosecutions that have bankrupted totally innocent American citizens, some of whom had served their country in great capacity. But that's a very easy fix, and this is not an administration that's been open to any of that kind of oversight.
I think the general thing is that the administration or the Trump people look at American politics before they came to power, and they say what we see is this, swamp. And we see the swamp, and we see how advantage was being taken. And Trump is a New York City real estate guy, so he knows very well that New York City and New York State is a bribery and political influence machine, and God knows how much money he and his company and his friends have paid that we'll never know about to get people to look the other way when they're buying steel or whatever. This is a real thing. And so he thinks this is how government works, right? And there were some, as you say, as Seth says, there was the arguments being made during the Obama administration that Sid Blumenthal should get contracts or his friends should get contracts. Then we get Hunter Biden and the Hunter Biden story. Then we get COVID. We're getting these fraud stories coming out about, the Somali fraud. Now we're getting these stories about autism fraud, which could be a gigantic story that people haven't even begun to reckon any sense of, right? These autism clinics and autism treatment centers in California that turn out don't exist, all of which dovetails with the obsession of RFK Jr. with supposed, incredibly rising autism rates, and those incredibly rising autism rates where we went from, in one generation, 1 in 166 kids being diagnosed with autism to 1 in 30. And it was, what's going on? Is it the environment? Are we poisoning? Or, what's happening? How has this happened? Maybe it's older parents, all of that. Or maybe all sorts of things happened in Medicare funding and other forms of treatment that made it incredibly advantageous for medical professionals and people who run for-profit institutions of education and others to announce that there was a huge spike in autism that needed to get state, local, and federal dollars paying for it. So we're at like the camel's nose, right? Just trying to poke under the tent of whether there may have been a kind of generational bullshit line that scared everybody half to death and created this entire world that we might start getting exposed the way the Somali fraud was exposed. But Trump looks at this, and the Trump people look at this, and I'm not saying they believe this. I'm just pointing it out that there was all the COVID theft and there was all the COVID fraud and all of that. And they're looking at it going, okay, we're just doing what everybody else did. If Steve Witkoff is going around negotiating with the Qataris while he is negotiating for the United States, how's that any different from anybody else? Don't tell me.
It's not just Steve Witkoff. The Trump family, the sons are going around buying up, merging with Kazakh mining companies. My colleague Tim Carney wrote about this recently. The crypto coin, the meme coin, which is bought by basically a Gulf state bank. I mean, there's a lot of financial corruption and self-dealing going on. And Trump has been very open about it. He said, in the first term, I didn't let my sons profit from my presidency, although that's a questionable statement. But he's like, this time, everybody does it. Anything goes. So that they can't stop me. And that to me is a real distinction right there. Like in the first term, he had advisors around him who said, this is unseemly. This is not, it also opens you up to the risk of all kinds of investigations and your family into investigations. And second term Trump is saying, I don't care about any of that. I don't care about norms, obviously, but ethics rules, all these things. And, the Democrats, if they regain control of the House, which we've talked about, will likely bring some form of an impeachment procedure. If they bring it on some of this financial corruption stuff, they might have a pretty serious case. They won't. They'll make the mistakes they've made before, I would predict. But that stuff is really disturbing to me because, again, that's entrenching exactly what he claimed he was going to run against each time he ran for president. It's wallowing in the swamp like a pig in mud. It is not draining it. And I think that's the distinction that a lot of people who might have voted for Trump the second time around are starting to realize.
I think that Trump looks at the Biden blanket pardons and the record of the interesting financial record of Nancy Pelosi, things like that. And he says,
AKA the whale.
Yes. And he says, I'm safe because they want to start digging. I know where some bodies are buried, and they all have bodies buried, and I am not going to be hemmed in this time. I'm not going to abide by a rule that just applies to me. It's bad. It's a terrible thing. I'm just saying. I'm trying to get in his head.
And look, it's true. He's got some magical "I'm rubber, you're glue" element to his career as a politician, right? So what was the name of the Atlanta prosecutor, the Georgia case? Fani Willis? Yeah. So Fani Willis says, I'm going to find any way to go after Trump. She's ruined and destroyed by that prosecution. Michael Avenatti, ruined and destroyed by saying he was going to take Trump down. Various other cases. Like there is this weird thing where you come at Trump and stuff happens that, you do summon the demon upon yourself if you are not Caesar's wife and are completely above reproach. So you're right that Trump.
I left Ilhan Omar out of that.
That's right. That's Somali fraud, right? So he may think, okay, everybody did it. Come at me, or of course the biggest one was the purloining of the classified information, for which he is indicted, and for which, there is that we even said, okay, well, now they've got him dead to rights. Like he did it. And then Biden did it. So he may look at this and say, nobody can come at me because this is a house of cards and the entire thing could come down Democrats and Republicans alike.
The difference this time, and this is why I wanted to talk about the anti-weaponization fund, is that it's potentially undercutting his political priorities, the things he has done well, particularly at the border, the things American voters like and want more of. And he's doing that. If he has to choose, that's why I'm saying it's going to be interesting to see if he compromises on that with Senate Republicans. The other thing is he's now doing it at a time where the economy is not great, and people are dissatisfied, and inflation is not decreasing at the rate that we've been promised, and there have been some bad economic signs for people, and gas prices not really where we want them to be. So all of these things combined, I think, make his cavalier attitude about some of these rules seem even more removed from what people are concerned about. So if you see someone building ballrooms and, doing all these lavish things while saying, I don't care about the economy and I'm focused on this war and your gas prices are up. Again, I'm trying to put myself in the head of the voter in the way that Abe just, I think, correctly put himself in the head of Trump. Trump is not addressing those concerns in the way that people need right now.
And you know what? He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to.
No, he's a lame duck.
He's a lame duck.
Also,
he's embraced his lame duckery. So therefore, maybe the next 2 years are about bringing home the cash. Now he's 80 years old. I don't even know why he needs to bother. Well, he doesn't need to bother for his kids
because it's a mark of success.
It's how he counts.
It's
right?
like when we look at max contracts in the NBA, nobody looks at the final number and goes, "Oh, well, thank goodness that he's getting 237 million over 10 years instead of 228 million over 10 years," or something like that. These are numbers that no longer have any meaning. But the point is that it's 5 million more than the last biggest max contract was. That's all that matters. And in a league like that, the players continually admit that. When you ask them, they say, this league is set up in a way that's how you show your appreciation for the players. That's how you show status, right? I mean, it's more than the other guy is actually more important than whether you need $300 million or whatever. There's something very similar happening with Trump. And he comes from that world of competition in a very similar way. I think it's a status thing among anything. And I think he wants to win, and he wants the money, and he wants to, he's almost going to be proud to be impeached a third time, because who's been impeached 3 times? It's like he's going to be in the record books, But the other problem with Trump and the way he handles these things, to me, is that he believes that there's a herd immunity of sorts in his world. That's what I don't like. Well, it's part of what I don't like about the anti-weaponization fund and all this debate, which is that I agree that some of the behavior of prosecutors toward Trump was totally irresponsible, unprofessional, and targeted in a way that it would be obviously inappropriate if it were done to somebody who wasn't the most powerful man in the world, right? Some of the behavior against him. But if he's going to start a fund and pay off like people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th to stop the peaceful transfer of power, those guys, maybe some of them got a bad rap. Maybe some of them didn't, just sort of got pulled by the crowd or whatever. I'm willing to believe there's a whole range of offenses and levels of offenses in the January 6th riot. But a sort of blanket idea for Trump is that I was mistreated. Therefore, anybody who was prosecuted because of something having to do with their defense of me, they were automatically mistreated as well. And so now there's this big net cast, when in reality, the lesson from what Trump went through in the 4 years between presidencies is that his enemies had lost sight of themselves and their professions, and they had gone too far. They had done a trick in New York to turn something into 32 felonies instead of 2 misdemeanors or whatever. There were things that they were tricks that people, even who weren't law experts, could say, that doesn't look right, that doesn't sound right. And I wouldn't expect that to be done to anybody else unless you were trying to get someone. That's not the case with somebody who's on video storming the Capitol.
No, look, the important point here is that everybody who is, I don't know, it's possible that somehow somebody did not commit a crime trespassing if they were arrested inside the Capitol. I don't quite know how that would work. You would need a Talmudic explanation to me. They were just standing there and the crowd pushed them into they happened to be standing 50 feet away, but somehow they were pushed into the building. They didn't want to be there. And then they were there. But
they'd already crossed barricades at that point. Yeah. I mean, this is where it does become Talmudic and kind of,
No, the problem is,
I'm just saying I'm open to the idea that someone's getting punished more than somebody else in the same.
Okay. No,
whatever. It's possible. Is all I'm saying.
Okay. I'm not.
But I'm not defending J6. My point is exactly the opposite. The problem with these funds is that they're helping J6 people when in reality those people were not generally mistreated, and there's been no case to be made. There's no individual determination. This person was mistreated by law enforcement. There's just he was charged with a crime because he likes Trump, and therefore I'm going to give him money.
But can I say, I think there's another way to frame this, the difference. The way Trump was unjustly pursued, and he was unjustly pursued in many ways, largely was high-tech and informational. beginning with Russiagate and suppression of the Biden laptop. It was cleaner. There were all these sort of parties working behind the scenes in ways that it took a long time to sort of tease out and sort out. Trump, as John said before, sort of comes at this as like a sort of New York real estate. It's much more conspicuous when he does it. It's sort of like it's out in front. He is not steeped in the institutional tricks that were used against him in the same way. So he's sort of coming at it in this very brazen way instead.
Well, and I think he mistakes transparency for moral certitude in these cases. Like, well, at least I'm doing it out in the open, whereas I think the argument a lot of us would make is it's bad no matter how you're doing it. It's bad Absolutely. For the system. It's bad for the country. It's bad for the American people to have leaders who think it's fine to just look. Biden's blanket pardons at the end of his term, particularly his pardoning of his own son and family members, was reprehensible. And we were very clear about that. Just as reprehensible were blanket pardons for all the J6ers. This is the tit for tat that I think MAGA folks think is, that's us winning. We've been so weak before. They're failing to see the forest for the trees. Long term, you're clear cutting the forest, and that's our system and the way it should work. And yes, there's always been corruption. There's always been people who try to take advantage. But to make the system maintain its health, we have to be willing to point it out on either side. And that's what we lose, I think, with some of the kind of MAGA approach to, well, at least I do it out in the open. I'm not trying to cheat you behind the scenes like the previous guy did.
Now there's barricades where there didn't used to be barricades. Now we have to have, closed off public buildings because of that. But also because of the fact that he won't denounce J6 for what it was, right? Like if we had a system of norms where the president was like, oh, guys, no, that's not what I meant. What are you doing? You can't storm the Capitol. We probably wouldn't need the barriers, right? The thing that cements it as like a new norm, or a permanent broken norm is Trump's his defiance.
It's worse than that because he did say it and then he took it back. He said it on January 6th. He said, go home, you're doing the wrong thing. People in his administration said it. Ivanka said it. This one said it. And then as 2021 continued and as he left and all this, he started thinking, that's not fair, and started hinting.
A new lost cause. Yes, exactly.
Exactly, a new lost cause. And this is where the selective prosecution stuff comes in, because in fact, there's nothing to compare to January 6th. No, maybe the people who occupied the Wisconsin State House in 2011, attempting to prevent the passage of legislation that Scott Walker had been proposing, bears some minimal resemblance to this, but nobody practically in American history had ever gone into the Capitol building or into a public to attempt to interfere with the proper process of the workings of the government. That had never happened before. It's sui generis. The crime is sui generis. And unless you punish it and make clear that any thought of doing this again means you're going to be thrown into a cell and rot there for a while. So don't even imagine it. And Trump has now, of course, made that imaginable, because there is the example of people who did it. And then, they went through hell and they went to jail and all of that. And then they got pardoned. So maybe that can happen for the AOC people, or for I don't know, for President Vance, or for President whoever, in whatever time frame that will happen. So there's no comparison to other crimes or other circumstances. Political violence has a particular valence, but I do have to say we're also living through this period in which there were riots in Minneapolis, there were riots in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and places like that. And the people who did that were not prosecuted. Now, that's not federal and it's not political in the same way, but we are living through a time in which left-wing politicians do not want to prosecute offenses like trespass, like shoplifting, like misdemeanors of any kind, because they claim that it is racially inequitable to do so.
I was going to add, they don't want to prosecute any alleged perpetrator who fits certain categories either. It's not just the crimes, it's the perpetrator.
Right. So the way of putting this is my mother used to say, everybody's got a favorite crime. That is to say, there's a crime that you don't care about niceties. Like you hate, I mean, this is going to sound terrible because everybody does. Well, like you hate rape. So, or, Me Too happens. So then you go and you start petitioning to change all the laws so that 30 years after something happened and the statute of limitations had been, had long since been frozen, you change the laws ex post facto to allow for prosecutions of things that happened 30 years ago because you hate them so much. And then people get prosecuted under those terms. And then maybe they're found guilty, and then a court says, no, this is unconstitutional because it's ex post facto prosecution. But when you have a favorite crime, you don't care about the Constitution. Your favorite crime, throw the book at him. Let God sort it out. It's sort of like, and it's like, NYPD Blue logic, and when David Caruso in the first season of NYPD Blue, there were all these criminals. He can't get them on the charges that he wants to get them on. So he plants evidence and arrests them on other charges, and they go to jail anyway. And it's kind of like biblical justice. That was kind of this, weird left-wing, right-wing fantasy thing that went on just before the crime wave broke in the 90s. Everybody's got that. So mostly peaceful protests in Minneapolis, blocking bridges during protests against Gaza. 500 people could get arrested for blocking a bridge protesting Gaza. It was a deliberate decision of the political forces in the cities in which that happened to let them all go. Or if you arrested them, you put them in plastic handcuffs, and then the cameras were off, and then you cut off the plastic and you let them go. And so that's the world we're living in. We're living in a world that is creeping perilously close to antinomianism about our own laws when they involve things that happen that feel politically righteous to someone or some other force in the country. And Trump is a big part of that, maybe the largest part of that, but so is Mamdani. So was Jacob Fry. So is Karen Bass. So is that whoever that awful mayor of Portland is, and Seattle. Like they want the crime. They don't want the criminals to be prosecuted because they don't think it's really a crime. And it's a terrible precedent or whatever thing we're living through. And I don't know how it's going to get reversed. Let's go back to Iran for a second here. So Trump is not responding to his own negotiators and what they're saying. So we are literally, I don't even know where we are today.
That's why I said we're the briefcase girls. We're the briefcase girls, all of us.
Right.
Deal or no deal. That's who we are.
Are we still blocking the Iranians' access to the Strait? I think so. Not sure. I think so. They announced they were going to start Project Freedom. They're not doing Project Freedom, which is the American escorting of private commercial traffic. Are we, all I know is that we're not saying anything. We're negotiating and leaking stuff, or someone's leaking stuff that about deals that sound pretty advantageous to the Iranians, and the Iranians aren't buying it. The Iranians, Ghalibaf, the premier, just said, if I can find this now, I can't believe I keep having these things and then they disappear on me. Ghalibaf just said this 48 minutes ago. We seize concessions not through dialogue, but with missiles. In negotiations, we merely make them understand. We have no trust in guarantees or words. Only actions are the measure. No action will be taken before the other side acts. So he is saying, we're going to fire missiles at you, and then you're going to concede to us. This is us having like spent 48 days bombing the crap out of them. So Iran is not going to do anything until we concede, is what he's saying. So how are we supposed to continue negotiating? What are we negotiating over? Trump has one red line, right? Which is no nuclear weapons, and we get the dust. And he's saying, I'm going to fire missiles at you. So don't we have to start the war again? I am taking crazy pills here, because nothing is making rational sense, except that some people like Steve Witkoff and Tom Barrack and others are looking at the possibility of collecting hundreds of billions of dollars in real estate fees. Why haven't they walked away from the table and flown back home? Well, what are they doing there?
And some of the reporting we have in terms of what's going on in the Pentagon is that our military leaders actually have presented Trump with the available options were hostilities, kinetic action to resume. It's just they're waiting on him to make that decision. So I would be curious if anyone would speculate about who's talking to him about waiting. Why is he sitting on his hands? What is the delay? Is he waiting for inflation numbers, gas prices, bond markets? I'm curious, because up to now, we've at least seen him kind of ping-ponging around on social media with various statements. And this time he's not deciding yet. So I'd just be curious if anyone would speculate who's got his ear on that.
I mean, I think the danger here is the danger that we began with, which is not just that, he's not making a decision, but that the Iranians are putting themselves in a position to make a stronger showing in part two, if there is a part two, than they did in part one. They're digging their missiles out. They've had like 6-7 weeks to do this. They're digging their missiles out. They're probably repositioning their forces. They're making different battle plans, trying to figure out, maybe they're like, let's not waste missiles on Israel, which can basically knock them down. Let's go at Saudi Arabia, which ordinarily they wouldn't hit because of fear that they would, that they might hit the holy sites. Or let's destroy the UAE or something like that. And we're letting them do that. We are letting them dig out their missiles. That's crazy. We started this war. That we need, if they start at this point, if they use those dug up missiles and they start killing people in the Gulf, that's on us. Unless we knock them down now, they're digging them out. We saw the CNN story. So fly the planes over where the missile sites were and blow up the missile sites again.
Well, that's the thing is, right, if CNN knows they're digging them out, we know they're digging them out. That's the thing, right? The government knows
CNN's
what's going on.
Reporters are probably helping them dig them out. But
yeah, this was like, when Assad used chemical weapons, was it 2013 was the big attack in Ghouta? The subsequent reporting made clear that the Obama administration, because they were still in their we're going to enforce our red line phase, was watching them do it, not saw it happen, was watching them. We watched from space or whatever, set up the material, dig things out, set things up, set targets, load them up, literally, because initially the whole point was we have to be able to prove, we have to be able to say without a shadow of a doubt that Assad is responsible, Assad's forces are responsible for using chemical weapons. This is something that after World War I, the world understood can never be allowed to happen again. So we're going to take action. They had to build the case. Instead, what they ended up building was the case of their own bystandering of this horrible crime. But in the end, we learned that they watched as it was happening. If they're digging out missiles in Iran. And CNN is like, look, they're digging out missiles in Iran. We knew 3 weeks ago when they went to the hardware store and picked up 3 shovels. We knew when they rented a truck.
Not only that, they know that we know. So this is a state from their point of view. They're saying we're safe. We can do this in plain sight because Trump is done. And if this is where they're putting their energy and resources into digging up missiles, why would we even imagine that they're interested in negotiating a peace?
Well, now as ever. So now, uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. Henry V, wandering around the battlefield at night, unable to sleep because he knows he's got to make a decision about whether to send his men into battle and possibly lose their lives. And, he sought this job. He took it. He wanted it. He got it. And he started this war. And he will be a figure of historical humiliation if this somehow ends with the Iranians stabilizing themselves and us having put on the table, if we have put on the table, $300 billion in reconstruction money, and that even to that they say, drop dead. I mean, nobody else. There's no, you got nowhere to turn. Got no one else to blame. Nobody else. Can't blame Bibi, can't blame the Gulf, can't blame anybody. He stopped it. He got all head up and said he was going to destroy their civilization. Then he's like, no, I'm not going to destroy their civilization, ceasefire. And now they're making it more and more difficult for him to restart the war. And that's all on him.
And what confidence could any of us have that when they start digging out the nuclear facilities to get them up and running again, or to reclaim enriched uranium that's buried underneath, what confidence are any of us supposed to have that will be a line the president won't let them cross? He'll let them dig out some weapons, but not others. We're watching them dig out what we've buried. And so the idea all along has been, well, if they really try to resurrect one of the enrichment facilities, that we won't let them have. But obviously we would, right? I mean, what lesson would I take from this if I were Iran? They will let me get away with it. And if I'm in the public, I'm saying, yeah, they'll probably let him get away with it. What was it all for,
I mean, this is a real time of testing. We will have a weekend here. Every day is a week, meaning every day the Iranians recover and recover and recover and recover. And every day that we do not do something about them, we get weaker and weaker and weaker, unless, we're somehow, we've got a production line going we don't know about that is like making, a million drones that we're going to fly at them and have a new warfare strategy and destroy them or something like that. But that's sort of science fictional. So
he can't get approval for the budget for the Border Patrol stuff right now. I mean, there's a real funding issue in that pipeline too.
Right. And, Matt Continetti has a piece today in the Wall Street Journal in the Free Expression section in which he's saying, look, there's now developing an anti-Trump, or at least Trump skeptical wing of the Republican Party in the Senate. And a resolution of the Iran war that appears to be a capitulation will leave him not friendless in the Senate, but will leave him effectively powerless. And with November coming, and the real possibility that he will be depowered by results in November, and then, just 2 Republicans have to cross the aisle, or 1 Republican will have to cross the aisle to block his desiderata or pass things that he doesn't like. And I don't know where that goes. I do believe, and maybe we can end on this, that the results in the Texas primary that I think we all four of us at least, find disheartening that Paxton beat John Cornyn, and that Paxton is a worse candidate in the general election than Cornyn would be. The more I read about the Democrat James Tallarico, the more it seems absolutely science fictional to me that he can actually make it into the Senate.
I think he actually was. He must have been one of the actors in that Men for Kamala advertisement, because he sort of exactly embodies everything about that version of masculinity on the Democratic Party side. I mean, it is kind of surreal.
I mean, he referred to women as our neighbors with uteruses.
Which, I'm sorry, I get to do the as a woman because I'm the woman on the podcast and I'm the token. As a woman, those are fighting words. I just want to come at someone who would actually say that instead of use the word woman. But that's a signal. That's a signal to the left on where he stands on transgender issues, on all of that host of culture war stuff that the Democrats should have learned in 2024 is not a winning issue for them.
I want to close with a recommendation.
Also, it's offensive to
that you got.
to
Sorry,
hysterectomy patients.
There you go.
Saying,
you know what?
It's like another childless cat lady thing. It's like, oh, they're people if they have a uterus. That's not actually what defines.
My God, that is a
absolutely
fantastic
right.
point.
If you get cancer and you have to have a hysterectomy, then I guess you're not a woman, according to Tallarico.
Or a neighbor. You're not a neighbor.
You're not a neighbor either.
I'm
Yeah, the
sorry,
neighbor
you're not
thing
my
also,
neighbor if you have had a hysterectomy. Get out of here. I'm putting in a restrictive covenant in my HOA because you had a hysterectomy. I need neighbors with uteruses right now. That's all.
I just think an army of crones with an understanding of human biology is all that is needed to take down that sort of candidate.
I mean, there are 10 or 15 things that he said, and clearly he's a more winsome candidate in certain ways than others have been in that role. But he is takedownable. That's all I'm gonna say. He's a rich target of opportunity. Not that Paxton isn't also, but yeah. So I don't think that the revolutionary moment that will flip the Senate to the Democrats is going to come in Texas, based on what I've been reading the last couple of days. Quick final recommendation, a book I haven't read since I was 15, 16 years old, and I am now halfway through. I haven't read this writer in decades. William Faulkner's Light in August, which is just astonishingly beautiful. And it's very hard to describe. It's a story that begins with basically a teenage girl who has been impregnated by a wandering guy, and she goes out to find him in the wider world on foot. And we're always reading Faulkner imitators. And I know Abe I'm not as much, but Abe is a huge fan of Cormac McCarthy, who is probably the signature sort of follower of Faulknerish literary style or literary approach.
His early stuff, especially.
Yeah, but
McCarthy's early stuff.
Yeah, McCarthy's early stuff. But this is just an unbelievably beautiful piece of writing, and laden with a certain type of emotion that doesn't appear in some of his other work. And as I say, I'm only halfway through. But it's been unexpectedly elevating and calming in some odd ways. Given,
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How much do you remember from your teenage reading? I'm a huge fan of rereading classics that you first read when you were not an adult and then picking them up again. I do that with Middlemarch every few years, my favorite book. What did you remember? Are you having sort of recollections from having read it as a teenager now, or is it all kind of a blank?
I had very little in the way of memories of it because it's such an impressionistic kind of picaresque story. I remember that Lena, the main character, or the woman that we're following, the girl that we're following, what I did remember was her, it's going to sound crazy, but her love of sardines, and penniless, beyond penniless. And if she can get 15 cents together, the great pleasure of her life is being able to buy a can of sardines. And this description that Faulkner gives of her, the way that she eats the sardines and licks her fingers from the oil that the sardines are packed in the can, and the fact that you can take such astounding and astonishing pleasure in something that seems totally workaday, and how she is going through life living entirely in the present while everybody around her is looking at her in grief, thinking, my God, she is on her way to misery and ruin, is a very potent thing.
That was a great question, Christine, and great answer, because I forget everything I read, so I which is a blessing, because I get to enjoy rereading stuff all the time. But I have to say, in particular, you're right. I mean, when I'm thinking back on the Faulkner books I've read, they really sort of atomize in your mind when you close them, which is not a knock, but they're like dreams almost, So they sort of float away once you're not in it.
Right. Well, I remember the bravura, like his two real bravura books, right, which are The Sound and the Fury and As I Lay Dying. So The Sound and the Fury, of course, begins with this long, the sort of first third of the book it's called The Sound and the Fury because it's the tale told by an idiot. It is the narrative account of a mentally disabled member of the Compson family, Benji, who lives in a perpetual present. So as you're reading it and you have no background, like you haven't gotten the plot line, it is Benji explaining what is happening in his family, but something could have happened 20 years ago, something could have happened today. His dead brother comes alive and then is dead again and then comes alive again. And this evocation of what life is like for somebody in this condition, is a piece of writing that is so, as I say, bravura, that even if you don't remember the details, what you remember is your jaw-dropped amazement at Faulkner's ability to evoke this sort of thought pattern, something like that. And then As I Lay Dying, which is about the what would you call it, the moving of a corpse, dead body that has to be buried, and told from 15 different perspectives, each of them, and again, unbelievably bravura in this coffin that has to go through. The coffin goes through intense tribulation. So those books are incredibly memorable, but as a whole, not really incident by incident or anything like that. Whereas there are books whose plot incidents I remember, very vividly. Dickens, certainly, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, because the Bronte sisters, because those are books in which plot is essential to the moral frame of the story. Like the story is what is teaching you what the writer is trying to impart.
Well, and Dickens has so many unusual twists that are like just accidents of fate in his plots, which are incredibly memorable. The letter with the handwriting that someone reminds someone of. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it is a very interesting thing. But I really am also at the point where I picked up a book I loved, an Ed McMahon crime novel, 87th Precinct crime novel. And I'd read them all when I was a teenager. There were 40 of them or something like that. So I picked it up. And then I realized that not only had I read it before, but about 50, 60 pages in, that I had reread it 3 years ago.
So you have to start marking those books with the date read or something. So
yeah. Yeah, well, because those are formulaic. Those are basically the characters never age. They're all the same age over the 40 years, although the city that they're in changes. So they remain the same, and this evocation really of the Upper West Side of New York follows it follows the historical pattern of what was going on at any given moment when he wrote them. But that was a kind of humbling experience. Humbling experience. I had that experience once I was watching the remake of Shaft with Samuel L. Jackson, made by John Singleton. And I was like, I can't believe I never saw this before. It's not really as good as the original, but it's, da, 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 da. And then literally an hour in, something happened. I went, oh yeah, I saw it on a date in 1999. And it was so mediocre that it had left absolutely no impression on me whatsoever. Has that happened to you guys? Like with a movie?
I have many dates that have left no impression.
Okay, with a date, yes, yeah.
No, that's happened with plenty of movies. Or sometimes I'm just not sure. Especially if you watch a lot of sci-fi movies, and you go, It's pretty similar to something I saw. Let me keep watching. Did I see this exact? Yeah, I saw this,
Yeah. I think the weird part is that the younger I was when I saw, I mean, this is the horror of getting older. Like the younger I was that I saw something, the more weirdly enough, the more burned in my memory, it is. So I probably remember Flintstones episodes better.
Definitely.
Than I remember the book that I read last week.
Yeah, I mean, I watched, when I watched Jurassic Park with my kids, I was in a state watching it, rewatching it all these years later for the whatever number of time, and knowing everything that they didn't even achieve watching it the first time.
Yeah,
because they didn't. I saw it in the theater. And, when I was a kid, TVs didn't look like what they look like now, and you didn't. And so it was a totally different experience. But also when Jurassic Park came out, it was different. It really was. It was like something different that you hadn't seen before.
Like
and now there's 12 Jurassic Park movies. Yeah. But but there was it was a in a way it was a revolutionary. So for kids who were 10 years old when it came out, indelible experience seeing this in the movie theater. And my kids are like, well, we've seen things like it, and it's just a very different experience.
I mean, there are 3 or 4 moments like that interesting because I took my kids to see Star Wars on May 4th. My 2 of my kids at a revival, and I saw it the day it opened in Times Square, 4:30 show at the Lowe's Astor Plaza Theater, and the moment that they jump into hyperspace, the entire audience, this is a movie theater, burst into applause. Just that thing where the stars stretch and then the ship it's the simplest special effect you've ever seen. It changed the world. That moment, no one had ever seen a moment like that in a movie before. It changed the world. It changed the way people saw movies forever. And there were 2 others that I can think of. One was the end of Back to the Future. No one had ever done what was done at the end of Back to the Future, which is that you change the past and the present is better for what you did when you changed the past. It was such a brilliant plot twist because all you ever knew was it's got to go back to the way it was. That's how these things work. Those are the ironclad rules. And Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale, who wrote it, they had another idea. And then the third one, which I remember vividly as being the moment at which everything seemed to change, it's a little moment, is in Terminator 2. And Terminator is a great movie, and I love Terminator, and it's amazing. But there is this moment in Terminator 2 where the floor, this checkered black and white floor in this insane asylum, starts to morph and change, and the bad Terminator rises from the tiles and reconstitutes himself as the actor Robert Patrick in the cop uniform and is there ready to kill Linda Hamilton. And no one had ever seen anything like that before. That special, that moment, which was like, okay, now they can do anything. They've crossed the barrier and they can show you anything. And that is actually true, because that was the moment at which, besides like Spielberg and Lucas and stuff like that, somebody else came along with new ideas about how to use special effects, not in space stories and but in like as an element of a thriller, mystery, serial killer thing in the real world, in a building that you recognized or something like that. And that sort of, so those are the three that I remember. I don't know. Okay, so this has been fun, particularly after how horrible the first 50 minutes of this podcast was. So I hope we've left you with a pep in your step, and change the mood from dour and dark and bleak and horrible to better. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend. We'll be back on Monday for Abe, Seth, and Christine. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.